Hello, my name is Nathan Mirsky, and this is my channel, The Digital Scribe. And today, I want to talk to you about the meaninglessness of words, or more accurately, the fact that words do not have inherent meaning. This and a few other facts about languages and words that have some ramifications I don't think people think about enough. Some of these facts and some of these ramifications might seem self-explanatory or simple, but the ramifications of these facts specifically, I see not in the way that people speak and the people communicate online. I see that people aren't thinking about these enough. And this video is going to be a little on the rough side. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm probably going to end up redoing this video at some point with some more thought, but I really felt that I should put this out here because I think this is a conversation that needs to be had. The first fact that I want to cover and led to the title of the video is words do not have an inherent meaning. A word, whether you're dealing with words like in a spoken language or sign language or a written language, um, words are, you know, do not have the meaning in and of themselves. Um, the word caca can mean cake, it can mean brother, it can mean um, excrement, it can mean all sorts of things. Now, one might point out, well, those are in different languages because kaka means cake in Irish, it means brother in Swahili, and it means excrement in pretty much most of the Romance languages. Um, but even within the same language, you have words like peruse, which can mean to read carefully, or it can mean to read very much not carefully. And the same word can mean different things in different areas and at different times in different situations. There's no inherent meaning to a word. And also, languages are constantly changing. In fact, a lot of the reasons why you see the same word having different meanings in different areas is because over time, speakers of the same language started changing the language in different ways in different areas. I mean, that's where you have the different ways in which the word burger is used in America versus Britain, where an American will call it a burger only when it's a patty, regardless of the bread used for the most part, whereas a British person will call things a burger that are on a burger bun, whether or not it's in a patty form or not. Obviously, there's some exceptions to this, but they use the same word in different ways. It's the same language, but the language evolved differently in different places. And that's where, again, you'll say, okay, this is British English, this is American English. But the thing is that classifications of language are arbitrary. Because that's where the difference between British English and American English, you can say that, but then there is many different forms of American English, many different forms of British English, and that's not even going into other countries. But even going back in time, like English, you generally have it between modern English, early modern English, middle English, and old English. And then that's only the history of the English language. Before that, the English language evolved from various Western and Northern Germanic dialects. And you can And linguists have further walked the language back to Proto-Germanic, Proto-Indo-European, and then but all those divisions are arbitrarily set along particular changes in the language, and the language, though, has evolved in a steady, fluid way, and you could technically put divisions in all sorts of places, and those divisions don't have to be where they are. But the thing is that humans naturally group things in classifications to make it easier to talk about and to think about, but you have to still remember that those divisions are arbitrary and are just there to help with the discussion, but they do not necessarily mean as much as you might think they mean. Another important thing to remember is language is a collective property. The way in which you use language contributes to the way that the language will evolve. What words you choose to use and to what degree, how often you use a word, whether you overuse a word, underuse a word, um, to what degree you use different words to distinguish between different things, or use the same word to describe the same thing, thus making that, whether making a word more generic or more specific. How you use a language contributes to the whole, and then how everyone uses the language shapes how it evolves and changes. And finally, language is a system of communication. This has to go to the purpose of language. Language is a way of translating our thoughts, as well as describing reality. Um, like all other forms of translation, it's not perfect. And because that's where we each have our own thoughts, our own feelings, and it's a challenge to translate that into words that other people can understand. And that is the primary purpose of language, and you can't lose sight of that. And so all of these different factors go into a number of principles and ramifications of the facts of language and how it affects how we communicate, that I don't think a lot of people think about enough. So first, a word can describe or label, not define. All right, so what I mean by that is you take any word, and most word, or at least most words you can describe, you can say is a description or a label. I'm specifically focusing on things like nouns and verbs and so on. So a word that is functioning as a label is where that thing, that word is just the word for the thing, and it's not referencing anything. So like, for example, just think about like the words like sun and moon and star. Um, you don't say like it's called the sun because of something. It's just the sun because that's the word you use to describe it. Um, Whereas a description is something that um, it's called that because um, it's relying on another word, and so it's either comparing it to something, or like, for example, the word runner is someone who runs, and so it's relying on the word run, the run being a label for the action of running, and then the word runner is a description of a person who does the action. So that's where most words can be descriptions or labels. And just to be clear, sometimes this how you can classify a word can shift. good example is the English word biscuit, specifically as it applies to the American biscuit, because the word biscuit is a description originally, because it comes from French, meaning to bake twice. And that's where the original biscuit was, um, things like sea biscuits and hardtack, where they're bread meant to be stored long over a long time and for like travel, and so they are baked twice to dry them out so that they can last a long time. And some ship biscuits or hardtack can last years if kept and stored well. The American biscuit, after colonization, started to gradually evolve based on just changing cooking habits, changing ingredients, and gradually got softer and then fluffier until it's no longer a description anymore, like the original biscuit, where it's talking about the action made to create it. It then becomes just a label because it's no longer a description anymore and they're just called biscuits. Doesn't matter that it's no longer a description, that's just what they're called. You could even go so far to say the same thing about American football, which no longer uses the feet as much as it used to be back when it was all pretty much the same game as soccer before they eventually diverged. Anyways, but the important thing is words don't define anything, because what words you use to describe and label things does not change the properties of the thing itself. Things are just the way they are. And the problem is, this is where you get to um, where like people will either intentionally for purposes of deception or unintentionally due to just lazy thinking, use one word and apply it to something else as a way of redefining what that thing is. Um, or they might change the word they use um, to describe refer to something as a way of changing how people think about it. But that's where the next point, um, well, next 2 points, excellent, brought up both. Changing the word you use with the thing does not change the thing it describes. Um, a good example of this is with things like with terms for mental illness, as well as terms for various mental conditions. Um, you have a lot of words now that are considered slurs or insults, things like moron, idiot, retard. All of these were actual medical descriptions at one point. I mean, technically, if you're going back into ancient Greek, idiot was more of a social description than a mental one. But that's neither here nor there. Point being is, people use them as insults because they're describing people as being like people with those conditions or those um, qualities. But the thing is that it's like, okay, you don't want it to be associate insults with these, conditions which aren't people's fault. But the thing is that you come up with new names for these conditions and qualities. But the thing is, and then they get used as insults as well, because ultimately the reason why they're being used as an insult is because people are comparing someone to those conditions. So it doesn't matter what word you use for the condition. Um, if you want to make a change, you have to try to convince people to act in a different way or think in a different way. Changing words does not have that effect. The other point, um, is a bit of a change of pace. If you want to communicate, you use the words you need to, not the words you want to. Again, words do not have an inherent meaning. Language is a system for communication. The purpose of language is communication. Um, Throughout my life, I have had multiple circumstances where I've had to communicate with people that were not native English speakers, or they just had a different language background than I did. I have a very eclectic language background, considering the fact that I had very early exposure to classical literature. I've heard The Hobbit multiple times before I even learned to read. And that book, because of its age and the fact that the author was also a English professor with a love of languages, has a number of archaic words in it. And so like um, that plus, again, reading classical literature like Jane Austen, Robert Louis Stevenson, Mark Twain, and so on at a relatively young age, once I did start reading, some words that are a little bit on the more archaic side are, to me, in like my personal, how I think of language, is more normal than for most other people, where they are archaic words that they either are completely unfamiliar with or um, aren't don't use on a regular basis. And so when I'm talking with people all the time, I might have to adjust the vocabulary I use to make my feelings or thoughts known. And that's where the thing is that I see both online and in person, a lot of times people will, especially in like argumentation, they will get um they will be attach their ideas so firmly to the words that they're using that they are completely unwilling to use a different terminology. And they also don't realize that the other person might be using certain words differently than them, meaning different things. And um, that's where like when you're having a conversation, defining your terms is so important. Like, what do you mean by each of the words you're using? um and that's where, if you want to communicate, that's what you have to do, because again, the words do not inherently have the meanings that you place on them. Whatever words you need to use to carry the meaning that you want to carry so that the person understands, those are the words you need to use. And that's where the speaker is responsible for trying to be understood, and the hearer then, though, is responsible for trying to understand. Because that's the flip side. Because definitely have been in conversations, and I've seen conversations where the person is trying to explain what they mean by certain things, and the other person absolutely refuses to. Um, they choose to interpret what the person's saying based on a given meaning of a word that he used, despite him clearly defining what he means by that word. Also, people misspeak all the time, because that's where sometimes, especially when it's more of a active situation where it's like a complicated topic or something that you're passionate about, sometimes it's easy to trip over things and say the wrong word. And um, part of trying to understand the other person is recognizing when that happens and allowing the person to restate their position. But that's where, if you are honestly trying to communicate, you will try to understand the other person's position. And this might require you to ask for clarification. What do you mean by this? What is, how are you using those words? Um, but that's where it's a two-way street. It's a collective exercise. It's a dialogue. The other thing to keep in mind is the original meaning doesn't matter. It's how it's used matters. Because again, meaning is not inherent to a word. The a, a lot of times people will bring up, well, this word originally meant this. Um, like a good example might be the word decimation. Now, the word decimation historically goes back to um, Latin and ancient Rome, where it was a term applied to a punishment given to a Roman military unit that, under certain circumstances, and the the term referred to the practice of randomly picking 1/10 of the soldiers in that unit and then having the rest of the unit beat those soldiers to death. That's what that term meant. Now, some people might, like as a way of seeming smart, mention that, but the thing is that when the word got brought into English, I can't remember exactly what the date was, but pretty much right from the get-go, it was brought in with a more general meaning of just destruction and messing things up, not with the it had lost the sense of 1/10. And that's where a lot of times, especially when a word is borrowed across language boundaries, um, there's a ton of examples of this that I would like to bring up, but it strays into more distracting territory. But like a lot of times when languages borrow words, they're going to be um, either for new concepts that just don't exist in the culture, or if the original meaning of the word is something that they already have a word for, they're going to make it borrow it for something that's much more specific than the original meaning. I mean, I could go into some interesting terminology that English and various European countries have borrowed from Japan in very specific circumstances, but um, that gets into some uncomfortable territory. But ultimately, the meaning that matters in a conversation is how that word is used. And that's where, like, when you get into translation, like, say, think about like understanding the King James Bible. The King James Bible is translated from Hebrew and Greek into an older form of English. Now, if you got an actual 1611 copy of the King James Bible, that's you also deal with the unique spellings of the time, but like you have a modern edition of the King James Bible where they've updated the spellings, but it still has the old terminology. And that's where things about like the original the different meanings that the word jealous had in 17th century English versus modern English. And a bunch of other words that meant something different several hundred years ago than they do now. Sometimes it's more of just a slightly different connotation, but sometimes there's some significant differences in word meanings. And that's where if you do not understand those differences, you're not even going to fully understand the translation, let alone dealing with the issue of understanding what the original passage meant in the original language. And so, again, what matters is what was the word intended to communicate at the time it was uttered or written. Um, Another important thing is discuss principles, not labels. I don't intend to get particularly political on this channel, but this definitely heavily deals with politics and religion, in that a lot of times people will throw around labels, whether you're talking about Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, leftist, rightist, um, who is or who is not a true Christian. Ultimately, people get so stuck on what category a person fits into that they lose sight of the principles. And so, like, when you're dealing with politics, actually discussing what a person's unique personal stance is on various topics, how they think taxes should be handled, how they think various social positions should be handled, to what degree they should be legislated. Um, and then in the case of religion, exactly how one interprets various passages, and how you think that it should be applied to your day-to-day life, to what degree it applies to your day-to-day life, and so many other subjects, rather than because people focus so much on labels, and it ends up becoming a big faction war, where it's like, oh, that these guys are the bad guys, these guys are the good guys, and you often lose sight of what matters. And so that's where you have to look at the actual meanings, look at the actual principles, and um, communicate both your position, and try to understand the other person's position, um because if you're not doing that, the labels don't mean anything, because again, the labels are just words. And when you're not discussing the actual principles, then all of those labels is just no different than red team and blue team on a video game, where it's like you're just fighting for the sake of fighting, and you're not you have no meaning. Um, and then one of the last things that are really important, and this goes into the importance of just being careful about what you say. There's an interesting linguistic um, phenomenon called skunking. A word becomes skunked when it basically loses, is so overused that it loses a lot of its definition, distinct meaning. Um, One word that I try to use, sort of help do my part in resurrecting, is the word interesting. In modern English as it stands now, the word interesting is very much skunked. It can mean anything from, oh, I want to know more about that because it's interesting, which is actually closer to the original meaning, where it's something that piques your interest, something you want to find out more about. Um, but some people will be say it's like, I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I feel the need to say something, so I will call it interesting. Or I really don't like this thing, but I don't want to insult or make the other person feel bad about me not liking this thing, so I'll call it interesting. Or I want this person to go away, so I'll just call it interesting. And that's where interesting can mean anything. Thus, it is skunked. And, you know, there's a lot of words that people throw around to describe people they don't like. And those words used to mean things, but now they literally just mean, I don't like that person, because people overuse it. They do not bother to actually match it up with what that person actually is or what they do. So they aren't really describing that person. And um, that's where words are labels or descriptions. And that's where, if you aren't describing that person, if the word does not fit what they do, what they say, what they act like, then you are simply using it as a label to mean, I don't like you, because that's the label of a bad person. And people of all different positions and alignments have this bad habit. So, in conclusion, what to bring this all together, um, what's really important to remember is the connection between words and meaning is fragile, because again, the meaning is not inherent to the word, And that's where when you overuse a word, it loses distinctness. Just the same thing is if you refuse to use a word, or for whatever reason, if you try to replace it with another word, um, the everything you do when with regard to language, everything you write, everything you say affects the language as a whole. And that's where we are all stewards of our language. Um, every person is collectively responsible for their use of language. A lot of people will say the language at various places were better or worse, and they usually focus on things like the words in the dictionary. But the thing is that that has nothing to do with the quality of the language. The quality of language is how people use it. Um, a lot of people focus on, oh, these are bad words, these are good words. And it's like, no, there are no good and bad words. There is just well used words and poorly used words. And ultimately, an important thing to remember is the main enemies of good language are ego and ambiguity. And that's where, because ultimately, when I see people like refuse to change what words they use to something that would be more understandable, like for example, when a Christian teacher refuses to use words other than the standard theologian school terms, despite the fact that they're talking to people that aren't necessarily going to understand those terms. And so they need to actually change the words to something that still means the same way, but isn't going to um, um, confuse them or make them misunderstand. Um, so all in all, um, again, I know this is a very rough video, but this is something that I have been thinking about a lot recently, and I think it's something that needs to be talked about more and thought about more. To anyone that really desires to communicate and um, um, to have a sense of truthfulness, and who truly loves seeking the truth and communicating honestly with others. Obviously, people that do not care about honest communication, that do not care about the truth, those people are obviously going to do whatever they want. But that's where it's like, if you see yourself as a seeker after truth, if you see yourself as someone who, you know, wants to, you know, discover what is true, and who wants to communicate with others honestly, you know, we need to have these, we need to think on these things. Um, so wrapping up, I hope this was interesting and thought provoking. Um, please consider liking and subscribing, sharing. I got my Buy Me a Coffee link down below. I also have in the description links to a couple really cool creators. Rob Words, which is goes he produces a lot of great content about the history of the English language and how things are the way they are, and Ecolinguist, which is a really great channel about the connection between different languages and how you can still see the similarities, and like sort of exploring things like mutual intelligibility between different languages and talking about why those things exist. So um, I hope everyone has a good day and God bless you.